Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, we have COVID on the rise yet once again. Was a little bit quiet before, but no, doctors say it's still going. Flesh-eating bacteria from a lake, and Polish troops are now being deployed closer to its border with Belarus. Well, hospitalizations are on the rise, 60% in the United States. Dr. Bernard Kamens, a medical director with Mount Sinai Health Systems, in an interview with CBS Evening News, said that he expects cases to go up because there's been a lot of activity with traveling and vacationing and so forth, which creates a lot of exposure. He also said rising cases are not a cause for alarm, but that we need to pay attention, especially those who are at risk for hospitalizations or death related to COVID.
Well, people with the highest risk for COVID are, of course, the elderly, young people, immunocompromised, and pregnant women. Now, Dr. Kamens also said that people considering getting a vaccine, a COVID vaccine, should wait until there's a new booster available, which could be available as early as mid-September. Now, aside from vaccines, doctors recommend doing the usual things like washing your hands, covering your mouth when coughing, and avoided crowded places if you can. And it's been a little while, Katan, since we heard about COVID back in the news as it's coming back up right now.
Right, because it's never really gone away, but it's kind of become more normalized in the eyes of mainstream media. Well, the West Coast is in an unusual turn of events. It's bracing for a hurricane, this one named Hillary. Category 4 storm, which is off the coast of Baja Peninsula in Mexico. Although it is expected to weaken as it makes landfall, parts of California are under a tropical storm watch for the first time that state has experienced anything like that in nearly 83 years. Now, this storm, of course, even though it might weaken or is expected to weaken, is expected to bring heavy rain, flash floods, and mudslides. Well, FEMA is pre-positioning personnel to prepare for the storm and those in its path.
Well, some areas like Death Valley and Palm Springs could see 2 to 3 years worth of rain in just 2 to 3 days. Now, Molly Costello, an instructor with the San Diego State University Department of Geography, said regarding the difference between a storm affecting the West Coast and the East Coast is that the West Coast is very dry and the soil doesn't absorb all that water. So as soon as the rain starts hitting, it's going to start flooding. And of course, with California and the fires, they've had a lot of their vegetation wiped out. So that's going to add to the mudslides that they're talking about as well.
That's right. And California is, they get a lot of mudslides, and those things are very, very damaging. Well, while the West Coast is preparing for a tropical storm, New England, on the east side of the United States, is recovering from rare and damaging tornadoes that struck the area. 3 twisters touched down and left trees uprooted, roads flooded, and backyards an absolute mess. One resident called the event 30 seconds of hell.
Well, doctors at New York Langone Health transplanted a kidney from a pig into a human patient. Now, Dr. Robert Montgomery, chair of the Department of Surgery, shared with the press the results, saying the pig kidney seems to carry out the functions of a normal kidney. Now, the process called a xenotransplant is the 5th for the doctors at NYU Langone. Now, trials are only performed on patients considered brain dead and kept functioning with machines to keep the other organs viable.
Most patients are only kept alive for a few days, but this latest case, a patient named Mo, who underwent surgery to biopsy a tumor on his brain, he went in for that procedure. Of course, he never recovered. Well, he became the longest running trial for this pig organ transplant, that kidney being placed in a human, lasting for over a month. The doctors will study him for yet another month to make sure that his body doesn't reject the organ. Doctors are hoping that this will create a breakthrough for patients in need of organs. These particular organs that they're using for these transplants are not just kind of swapped out of a pig and placed in a person, but they're actually genetically modified so that they will more closely work with human bodies. But, you know, the verdict is still out as to how well and how long these things will actually work.
Well, our field correspondent Larry McGee has been working on several stories for us, including the forever chemicals that we've been talking about quite a bit in the news lately. But now with this weather heating up and everybody wanting to go to the beaches, we're seeing more cases of the flesh-eating bacteria that is on the rise. So Larry, what's the latest case here that we're talking about?
Alarms have been sounding for a number of years now concerning the change in the Earth's collective biome being driven predominantly by human activities, and one consequence of that is mutated and relocated microbes that cause disease. This has made popular pastimes like swimming more hazardous due to pathogenic bacteria like Vibrio fischeri, which produced a fatal infection in Connecticut recently, a state which annually sees a number of cases. As a result of the deaths of Polk County in Connecticut has issued a warning to any potential swimmers who might have open cuts or compromised immunity. Another danger compromising the health of many are forever chemicals, also called PFAS. Have a look at this video explaining the history and impact of the contaminant now found in large quantities throughout the nation's drinking supply.
A recent government study estimates that nearly half of America's tap water could contain toxic forever chemicals known as PFAS. As Stephanie Sy reports, there are thousands of these chemicals, and exposure to them can lead to serious health effects.
Last month, the U.S. Geological Survey tested the nation's drinking water and found at least 45% of samples had one or more forever chemicals. The study also found contamination centered in urban areas and near industrial sites. These chemicals have been used in many everyday items since the 1940s, from nonstick cookware to cosmetics to rain jackets. PFAS are also widely used as a firefighting chemical. 3M, a PFAS manufacturer, recently proposed a more than $10 billion settlement to address claims by hundreds of cities that want the company held liable for contaminating public water supplies. But litigation continues, and 3M will continue to make the chemicals until 2025. For more on the possible harms of PFAS and what can be done, I'm joined by Jamie DeWitt, professor of pharmacology and toxicology at East Carolina University. Professor DeWitt, thank you for joining the NewsHour. There have been studies showing that all of us have some level of PFAS in our bodies. How much should we worry about this?
Well, PFAS are a very large group of chemicals. There's about 14,000 individual chemicals, and they're associated with many of the chronic diseases that take people's lives today. So people should be concerned, but they should also be concerned about all of the different chemicals that are in the environment that are leading to chronic diseases that we experience in our lives today.
Also, a grave health concern is cancer, which isn't just an affliction of the aged or elderly. In fact, the number of people detected with the systemic breakdown in their 30s is starting to increase, according to reports by health officials. The trend is being noticed primarily among women with cancers of multiple organs, the etiology and origin of which officials say is complex, spanning everything from unhealthy weight to behavioral issues in a person's microbiome. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, you know, it's evident that as people get sicker, the environment gets sicker, and of course that feeds back to the people and they suffer the consequences. But like even in one of those videos, the sign was right up there saying not to go swimming, but people were still actually in the water. It doesn't seem that serious until it occurs to them.
Right, and you're seeing these the younger people, like Larry was reporting about, coming down now with the cancers that, you know, used to be only affecting the elderly. Right. Now young people in their 30s coming down with the colon cancer, the breast cancer, and so forth. So, you know, they're suffering, as you mentioned, from the sickness, but also the earth definitely not being in a healthy state, but suffering from the sins of mankind, giving it right back to the people.
Yeah, that's definitely the results of everyone's activities. Well, in a suburb of Pittsburgh, you might have heard this, Pennsylvania, a neighborhood was shattered by a huge house explosion. With no prior warning, the house suddenly explodes, sending debris across the block. The horrific sight was caught on several security cameras. Greg Renko lived just several doors down from the explosion, and he went to see if he could help his neighbors. He was also able to carry him out of the raging fire, and that man who was actually in one of those houses is now hospitalized in critical condition.
Well, 5 people, including 1 child, were killed, and almost 60 firefighters were treated by the EMS. Now, while it is yet unknown what caused the explosion, the city has taken the precautions of shutting the gas off to the rest of the neighborhood. Now, Mike Harwar, the president of People's Natural Gas, made this public statement saying, quote, "At this point, we can share that our system was operating as designed. It's still too soon to estimate when services will be restored."
Well, in total, 3 homes were completely destroyed in the explosion and the fire, of course, that followed. 12 more homes received damage. Well, just to give you an idea of how powerful this explosion was, houses as far as 4 doors down, or 4 houses down, actually had their windows blown out as a result.
Right, powerful blast. You can see from the video. I mean, the debris just flying, flying everywhere. American hostages are getting released, but at the highest price ever. Iran is set to receive $6 billion in frozen assets, as well as some prisoners of its own. In exchange, the United States will get back 5 Americans detained in Iran.
According to the United States State Department, the assets Iran will receive are held in South Korea and can only be used for humanitarian rights purposes. They also maintain Iran will be held accountable for human rights abuses, funding terrorism, and destabilizing the region. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said, quote, "Nothing about our overall approach to Iran has changed. We continue to pursue a strategy of deterrence, of pressure, and diplomacy. We remain committed to ensuring that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon," end quote.
Well, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, released this statement saying, quote, "Israel's position is known, according to which arrangements that do not dismantle Iran's nuclear infrastructure will not stop its nuclear program and will only provide it with funds that will go to terrorist elements sponsored by Iran." Now, some international experts do not disagree with Israel's stance. Sam Brownback is a former ambassador for international religious freedom. He told CBN News, quote, "They're one of the lead funders of terrorism all around the world, and they're a major opponent to key allies of ours like Israel and Saudi Arabia."
Well, Ambassador Brownback added, quote, "If I'm Israel, if I'm Saudi Arabia, I'm livid about this, and Israel's trying to limit Iran from getting a nuclear reactor and a nuclear weapon for obvious reasons, and this just helps fund those efforts." Well, Richard Goldberg from the Foundation of the Defense of Democracy also said the U.S. has clearly agreed to provide sanctions relief in return for almost nothing.
Well, Poland has made a serious move, sending 10,000 of its troops to the Poland-Belarus border. Now, there have long been concerns of the war in Ukraine spilling over into other countries, and now we are seeing tightening of security nearby. 4,000 of the Polish soldiers will be stationed along the border to support the border guard. The remaining 6,000 are nearby and ready to take action if the need arises.
Poland's defense minister told news reporters, quote, "We have to be ready for any scenario on the Poland-Belarus border. We do not exclude any, and that is why we decided to move the army closer to the border with Belarus. To strengthen the border, to scare away the aggressor is the reason. That's what we mean, to scare away the aggressor, and the aggressor does not dare to attack Poland."
Well, is the threat warranted? Well, in July, talk of war began due to the Wagner Group soldiers settling in Belarus. Now, Poland thinks that their intent for being there is not clear, and they could use their neighbors as a staging grounds to attack their country. Now, President Lukashenko has responded to these accusations, joking about going to Poland, but officially they have rejected such claims. Now, these developments are not surprising considering there is a history of bad blood between these two countries, specifically when it comes to their borders. Katan, these aren't the only two countries that we've seen that have these, this clear boundary, and if you cross into my country or I cross into yours, and these borders, they take it very seriously. So, when you set up, as we've talked about, just what the United States was even doing with NATO around Russia's borders, they don't take that lightly. These countries don't like that. If you're going to set up right on their border, as the president was saying here, if you're trying to make it look like you're going to come into our country, well, we're going to respond. And that's exactly what Poland did.
And that makes me think of that old saying, too close for comfort, because when your enemy is so close, as it is, we see these moves like you just mentioned, Poland responding and setting up troops along the border with Belarus, NATO around the Russian borders and so forth. It gives the country who's surrounded less time to respond. And that's why a lot of the leaders have been saying, well, we might act preemptively if we can continue to see these forms of aggression taking place, these buildup of troops, or as Putin said regarding NATO, continuing to supply Ukraine with weapons, we will resort to nuclear weapons if we have to. So that's something that's definitely continuously being on the table.
Yeah, setting up on somebody's border is very provocative, and it sets the stage for one wrong move, somebody making a mistake, and before you know it, the war has started. So if you'd like to find out more about these stories, contact the House of Yahweh. When you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the monthly newsletter and Prophetic Word magazine. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call the House of Yahweh at 1-800-613-9494. You can also visit the House of Yahweh by going to their websites at yahweh.com, yisraelhawkins.com, and yahwehsbranch.com. You can visit our website by going to ypnnews.com. You can email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. For all calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen. And don't forget the Israel Says and Ask Israel programs to aid you in study and understanding of the scriptures and prophecy. You can find those two programs by going to yisraelsays.com and askisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another classic message from Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.